The rain doesn't stop. It never does in stories like this. It hammers against glass, cold and relentless, like the world itself is trying to break through. Inside Aurelis, the kind of restaurant where silence costs more than sound, Maya Reeves stands with a tray of champagne flutes balanced on her palm. 6 months pregnant, exhausted, invisible. Above her, on a steel catwalk that overlooks the dining floor like a judge's bench, Alexander Harding laughs with his executives. He doesn't see her, not really, not yet, but he will. Because the ring on her finger, the one she twists when her hands shake, the one that catches the light like a secret, that ring is about to change everything. This is a story about falling, about what happens when the people who should catch you are the ones who pushed you, and about the moment when a single piece of gold reveals that nothing, absolutely nothing, was ever what it seemed. The crystal chandeliers cast fractured light across the marble floors of Aurelis. The scent of truffle oil and aged wine hung thick in the air, mixing with the soft hum of classical violins piped through invisible speakers. It was the kind of place where reservations were made 6 months in advance, where silence between courses felt sacred, where even the waitstaff moved like shadows trained not to disturb the illusion of perfection. Maya Reeves moved through that illusion with practiced invisibility. Her hands, calloused from years of holding trays and balancing plates, gripped the stem of each champagne flute with the kind of steadiness that came from necessity, not ease. Her back ached. Her feet, swollen inside black flats that no longer fit properly, screamed with every step. But she kept moving. She always kept moving. That was the only way forward when standing still meant drowning. She was 28 years old, though the weight in her chest made her feel decades older. Her dark hair was pulled back into a tight bun, regulation for the restaurant, and her uniform, a crisp white blouse and black slacks, had been let out twice to accommodate the curve of her belly. 6 months pregnant, visibly, undeniably pregnant. The kind of pregnant that made customers glance away uncomfortably, made managers frown during shift assignments, made the world treat her like a problem that needed solving. Above her, the private dining room on the upper level buzzed with the kind of laughter that came easy to people who never worried about rent. A procession of executives in tailored suits and designer watches occupied the space like conquerors claiming territory. They were celebrating something. A merger, a deal, a quarterly report that made numbers look like victories. Their voices carried down to the main floor, sharp and confident, cutting through the Mozart like broken glass. Among them sat Alexander Harding, 34 years old, CEO of Harding Industries, heir to a legacy he'd never asked for, and a brother he could never replace. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. His dark hair swept back in the kind of style that looked effortless but required a $200 barber. His Rolex caught the light as he gestured emphatically, explaining something about market projections to the VP of operations seated beside him. He glanced down at the main floor. His eyes swept across the dining area with the casual disinterest of someone who'd learned to see people as functions rather than faces. When his gaze landed on Maya, there was no recognition. No curiosity, just a flicker of something that might have been judgment or might have been nothing at all. He leaned back in his chair, raising his voice just loud enough to carry. Careful with those glasses. We don't pay for broken crystal. We pay for competence. Something I'm sure is hard to find when you're working for tips. Laughter erupted around his table. Sharp, immediate, the kind of laughter that fed on someone else's discomfort. A woman in a red dress covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. A man in wire-rimmed glasses raised his champagne flute in mock salute. Another executive coughed into his napkin, trying and failing to hide his amusement. Maya stopped walking. Her grip on the tray tightened until her knuckles went white. She didn't look up. She'd learned a long time ago that looking up only invited more cruelty. Instead, she focused on the tray, on the champagne that trembled slightly in the flutes, on the marble floor beneath her feet that suddenly felt like quicksand. She took a breath, then another,
Then she started walking again, moving toward the bar where she could set the tray down and hide for 60 seconds in the space between orders. Her right hand drifted to her left, fingers finding the ring that lived there like a talisman. She twisted it once, twice. The motion was unconscious, automatic, the way some people click pins or tap their feet.
It was the thing she did when the world became too heavy, when she needed to feel connected to something that mattered. The ring was white gold, delicate but strong, with an intricate engraving of interlocking wings along the band. It had belonged to someone important once, someone who'd believed that love mattered more than money, that legacy was measured in hearts rather than bank accounts. Someone who'd given it to a man who'd given it to Maya on a night that felt like a lifetime ago. She reached the bar and set the tray down with a soft clink. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the cool marble countertop, willing them to stop, willing her breath to steady, willing the humiliation crawling up her throat to dissolve before it became something visible. Bernard, the restaurant manager, appeared beside her. He was a thin man in his 50s with nervous hands and a perpetual sheen of sweat on his forehead. He looked at Maya the way someone might look at a stain on expensive fabric, something unfortunate that required immediate attention. "Ms. Reeves." He kept his voice low, but there was no kindness in it. "That's the Harding table. Do you understand what that means?" Maya nodded. She understood. Alexander Harding, billionaire, CEO. The kind of customer who could shut down a restaurant with one phone call to the right person. The kind of man who existed in a different orbit, where gravity worked differently and consequences were things that happened to other people. Then perhaps you could be more careful. Bernard's eyes flicked to her stomach, lingering there for a fraction too long. "We can't afford mistakes tonight." Maya wanted to say something, wanted to tell him that she'd been carrying trays since before she could vote, that she knew how to balance a dozen plates on one arm while navigating a crowded dining room, that being pregnant didn't suddenly erase years of skill and muscle memory. But she didn't say any of that. She just nodded again, picked up a new tray of wine glasses and turned back toward the dining floor. The decorative rug near the entrance was Persian, hand-woven, probably worth more than her car. It sat at an angle, one corner lifted slightly where it meant the marble transition. She'd walked past it 100 times that night, 1,000 times over the months she'd worked here. But this time, her foot caught the edge. It happened fast. One moment she was walking, steady and controlled. The next, her center of gravity shifted, thrown off by the weight of her belly and the unexpected resistance under her shoe. She stumbled forward, her arms instinctively lifting to catch herself, and the tray tilted. 2 wine glasses slid off in slow motion, their descent inevitable and horrifying. They hit the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo forever. Crystal exploding into 1,000 glittering pieces. Red wine spreading across white stone, like blood from a wound. The restaurant went silent. The violins kept playing, but everything else stopped. Every head turned, every conversation paused. Even the kitchen staff in the back froze mid-motion, their faces appearing in the service window to see what had caused the crash. Maya dropped to her knees immediately. Her breath came short and sharp, panic flooding her chest, as she reached for the broken glass with bare hands. "I'm so sorry." Her voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the silence. "I'm so sorry. I'll clean this up. I'll pay for it. Are you serious right now?" Alexander's voice cut through the air like a blade. He was standing now, his chair scraped back, his expression a mixture of disbelief and cold fury. He took a step toward the railing, leaning over it to look down at her with the kind of disdain usually reserved for something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. "Do you have any idea what those glasses cost?" His voice was loud enough to carry across the entire restaurant, loud enough to make sure everyone heard, everyone knew, everyone witnessed her humiliation. "More than you make in a week, more than you're worth." Maya's hands shook as she tried to gather the shards. A piece of glass sliced into her palm, sharp and immediate. Blood welled up, mixing with the wine on the floor, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. If she stopped, if she looked up, if she let herself feel the weight of every eye on her, she'd break. And she couldn't afford to break, not here, not in front of these people.
Bernard appeared beside her like a ghost summoned by disaster. His face was pale, his hands wringing together in agitation. "Miss Reeves, go to the back, now. She should go home." Alexander's voice again, still loud, still cruel, still making sure his words reached every corner of the room. Someone in her condition shouldn't be working in a place like this. It's unprofessional. It's...
He gestured vaguely at her stomach, his lip curling slightly as if her pregnancy was something obscene, something that offended his sensibilities by existing in his line of sight. "It's distracting." The word hung in the air like poison. Maya felt it settle on her skin, felt it sink into her bones, felt it carve itself into the part of her that still believed she deserved dignity. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady, her palm bleeding onto the white marble, a small pool of red spreading beneath her hand. "I said I'm sorry." Her voice was stronger this time, though barely. It cracked on the last word, betraying the tears she was fighting to keep hidden. "Bernard." Alexander didn't even look at Maya anymore. He'd dismissed her already, turned back to his table as if she'd ceased to exist. "Handle this. I don't want to see her again tonight." Maya walked toward the back. Not ran, not stumbled, walked. Because even now, even humiliated and bleeding and 6 months pregnant with twins she didn't know how to feed, she still had that much. She could still walk with her head up. She could still move through the world like she deserved to take up space in it. But as she passed the coat check, her hand moved again to her ring. She twisted it once, hard enough to hurt, hard enough to feel real. And in that moment, she didn't see Alexander watching her from the upper level. Didn't see the way his eyes had locked onto her hand. Didn't see the color drain from his face like someone had opened a valve and let all the blood out. Because the ring she wore, the one she twisted like a prayer, was impossible. It was custom-made, one of a kind. There were only 2 in existence, crafted by a jeweler in Florence who died 3 years ago. Alexander knew this because he'd been there when his brother commissioned them. He'd been there when Daniel slipped one onto Maya's finger at their wedding. And he'd been there when they buried the matching band with Daniel's body 8 months ago. Alexander's hand gripped the railing. His knuckles went white. His breath caught in his throat like he'd been punched. Around him, his executives were still laughing, still talking, still celebrating whatever it was they thought mattered. But Alexander wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at the woman disappearing through the kitchen door, at the ring on her finger that shouldn't exist, at the ghost of his brother walking through his life like she never left. He sat down slowly. His hand shook as he reached for his water glass. Someone asked him a question. He didn't hear it. Someone else laughed at a joke. He didn't react. His mind was spinning, racing through memories and possibilities, through everything his mother had told him and everything she'd left out. Across the table, his VP of operations frowned. "Sir, are you all right?" Alexander blinked. He looked at the man like he'd forgotten other people existed. "I'm fine." His voice came out flat, automatic. "Just fine." But he wasn't fine, because either he'd just seen a woman wearing his dead brother's wedding ring, or he was losing his mind, and he didn't know which possibility terrified him more. In the back hallway of Aurelice, Maya leaned against the cold tile wall and let herself shake. Her palm was still bleeding, leaving red smears on her black slacks. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts that didn't seem to reach her lungs. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall, because if she started crying now, here, in this fluorescent-lit hallway that smelled like bleach and old grease, she didn't know if she'd ever stop. Bernard appeared in the doorway. His expression was careful, practiced, the look of a man delivering bad news he'd delivered 100 times before. "Miss Reeves, I think it's best if you take the rest of the night off." Maya nodded. She didn't trust her voice. "And perhaps," Bernard hesitated, his eyes sliding away from hers, "perhaps it would be better if you didn't come back. We'll mail your final check." The word should have hurt, should have felt like another wound on top of all the others. But Maya was too numb to feel anything except the dull, constant ache that had become her baseline. She nodded again,
pushed off the wall, walked to the locker room where her jacket hung on a rusted hook and her purse sat on a metal shelf. She changed out of her uniform slowly, methodically, like someone going through the motions of a ritual they no longer believed in. The cut on her palm had stopped bleeding, leaving a dark line across her lifeline that looked almost prophetic. She wrapped it in a paper towel and pulled on her jacket, an old denim thing that didn't zip anymore over her belly. Outside, the rain had intensified. It fell in sheets, turning the parking lot into a shallow lake that reflected the neon signs and streetlights in fractured, distorted colors.
Maya stood under the awning for a moment, looking out at the downpour, at the world that seemed determined to wash everything away. Then she stepped into it. Let the rain soak through her jacket, her hair, her skin. Let it run down her face like the tears she still wouldn't cry. And she walked to her car, a 15-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield and an engine that sounded like it was dying. And she drove home through streets she barely saw, through a city that felt increasingly like it belonged to someone else. Her apartment was on the third floor of a building that should have been condemned years ago. The elevator was broken again, so she took the stairs, her hand on the railing, her breath laboring with each step. The hallway smelled like cigarettes and microwave dinners and something vaguely chemical she'd stopped trying to identify. Inside, the studio was dark except for the yellow glow of a streetlight filtering through thin curtains. Maya didn't turn on the overhead light. She just stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at the space that was supposed to be home, but felt more like a waiting room for a life that hadn't started yet. The ultrasound photo was taped to the refrigerator. She'd put it there 3 weeks ago, after the appointment where the technician had smiled and said, "Congratulations, it's twins," and Maya had laughed until she couldn't breathe. Two tiny figures curled together in grainy black and white, looking like question marks or parentheses, like punctuation for a sentence she didn't know how to finish. Her phone buzzed. A text from Bernard. Simple, final. Don't come in tomorrow. We'll discuss your employment status. Maya set the phone down on the counter without responding. She looked at the ultrasound again, at the 2 small lives depending on her, at the impossible math of raising children alone in a city that cost too much and paid too little. "I don't know how to do this." Her voice was quiet in the empty apartment, directed at the photo, at the twins who couldn't hear her, at the universe that didn't seem to be listening. "I don't know how to do this alone." The babies kicked, both of them, almost simultaneously, a rolling sensation that felt like waves breaking against a shore. Maya's hand moved to her stomach, pressing gently, feeling them move beneath her palm. They were real, more real than anything else in her life, more real than the ring on her finger or the memory of the man who'd given it to her, or the brother-in-law who just destroyed her without even knowing who she was. She walked to the small couch that doubled as her bed and sat down heavily. The springs creaked in protest. She pulled off her shoes, her feet swollen and marked with red lines from the straps. Then she lay back, staring at the water-stained ceiling, listening to the rain hammer against the window, and tried to remember when her life had stopped feeling like hers. Across the city, in an office 53 floors above the streets, Alexander Harding sat in darkness. The lights of Los Angeles spread out below him like a circuit board, beautiful and cold and indifferent. His brother's office, his office now. The leather chair still smelled faintly of Daniel's cologne, something expensive and subtle that Alexander had never bothered to identify. On the desk in front of him sat a photograph. He'd found it 2 months after the funeral, hidden in a drawer beneath old contracts and forgotten business cards. Daniel and Maya on their wedding day, standing in a vineyard with the sun setting behind them, their hands clasped together, their faces lit with the kind of happiness that looked almost painful in its intensity. Maya's ring was visible in the photo, the interlocking wings catching the golden light, unmistakable, undeniable. The same ring he'd seen tonight, on the hand of a pregnant waitress his executives had laughed at, on the hand of a woman he'd humiliated without knowing her name. Alexander's hand shook as he picked up his phone.
He scrolled through his contacts until he found his assistant's number. Claire. Efficient. Discreet. The kind of person who could find information about anyone and never ask why it mattered. The call connected after 2 rings. Claire's voice was professional despite the late hour. "Yes, Mr. Harding. I need you to find someone." Alexander's voice was rougher than he intended. "Her name is Maya Reeves. She worked at a realist. I need to know everything, where she lives, her background, everything." There was a pause. "Sir, it's almost midnight." "I know what time it is." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Please, Claire, it's important." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "I'll have something for you by morning." "Thank you." He ended the call and set the phone down. His eyes returned to the photograph, to his brother's face, to the woman standing beside him who'd somehow become invisible to everyone who should have remembered her.
Alexander tried to recall the funeral, tried to picture the mourners who'd filled the church, the people who'd shaken his hand and offered condolences and told him how much Daniel had meant to them. He couldn't remember seeing Maya there, couldn't remember his mother mentioning a wife, couldn't remember anyone acknowledging that Daniel had been married at all. It was as if she'd been erased, written out of the story, made to disappear. Alexandra's mother, Victoria Harding, the woman who'd built walls around their family so high that love had to fight to get in. The woman who'd looked at Daniel's fiancée during the engagement and said, "She's not one of us," as if that settled everything. The woman who taught both her sons that weakness was unforgivable and emotion was a liability, and the only thing that mattered in this world was power. He picked up his phone again, dialed his mother's number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He didn't leave a message, just sat there in the dark, holding a phone that felt heavier than it should, looking at a photograph of a brother who'd managed to find happiness in a family that didn't believe in it. And for the first time since Daniel's death, Alexander felt something crack open in his chest. Not grief. He'd felt that already, in private, in moments no one else witnessed. This was something different, something worse. It was the slow, creeping realization that he'd become exactly what his brother had spent his life trying not to be: hard, cold, cruel. A man who looked at suffering and saw inconvenience. A man who measured worth in dollar signs and dismissed anyone who couldn't afford to exist in his orbit. He thought about the woman at the restaurant, the way she'd knelt on the floor, gathering broken glass with bleeding hands. The way she'd apologized over and over, like she was the problem, like her existence was something she needed to justify. The way she'd walked away with her shoulders straight and her head up, even though everyone in that room had just watched her fall. And he thought about the ring, the impossible, undeniable ring that proved she was real, that she'd loved Daniel, that she'd been erased from his brother's story like she was something shameful instead of something sacred. Alexander stood abruptly. He couldn't sit anymore, couldn't stay still. He paced to the window, pressing his palm against the cold glass, feeling the vibration of the city below. 53 floors up, high enough that people on the ground looked like ants, high enough that consequences felt abstract, high enough to forget that falling meant hitting something hard and real and unforgiving. But Alexander was beginning to remember, and it terrified him. The morning came too fast. Maya woke to the sound of her phone vibrating against the coffee table, a harsh buzzing that pulled her from a dream she couldn't remember but knew had been better than waking. She reached for it with one hand, her eyes still closed, her body protesting the movement. Every muscle ached. Her back felt like someone had driven nails into her spine. The cut on her palm throbbed with a dull, persistent heat. The screen showed 3 missed calls. 2 from numbers she didn't recognize. 1 from the clinic where she'd scheduled her next prenatal appointment. She sat up slowly,
her hand moving automatically to her stomach, checking, always checking, to make sure the twins were still there, still moving, still real. They kicked in response. A flutter on the left, a harder jab on the right. She smiled despite everything, despite the exhaustion that lived in her bones now, despite the fear that wake her at 3 in the morning and whispered impossible questions about how she'd afford formula and diapers and a crib, about how she'd raise 2 children in a studio apartment with no job and no family and no safety net, except the ring on her finger that she'd never sell, no matter how hungry they got. The voicemail from the clinic was brief, professional. We wanted to confirm your appointment for next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Please call if you need to reschedule. The voice was kind but impersonal, the tone of someone who left 100 messages like this every day and couldn't afford to invest emotion in any of them. Maya looked at her bank account on her phone. $347. Rent was due in 6 days. It was $1,200. The math was simple and devastating. She had enough for food for maybe 2 weeks if she was careful, maybe 3 if she stopped eating anything except rice and beans. The prenatal vitamin she was supposed to take cost $40 a bottle. She had half a bottle left. She stood, her body moving on autopilot toward the tiny kitchenette that was really just a counter with a hot plate and a mini fridge. The coffee maker was broken, had been for months, so she boiled water in a pot and made instant coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard and regret.
But it was hot and caffeinated, and that was enough. The ultrasound photo stared at her from the refrigerator. She stared back, her coffee cup warm in her hands, steam rising into the morning light that filtered through curtains too thin to block anything. Sophia and Daniel. She'd named them in her head weeks ago, even though she hadn't told anyone, even though speaking the names out loud felt presumptuous, like she was claiming a future she hadn't earned yet. Sophia, after Daniel's grandmother, the woman who'd given him the ring, the woman who died when Daniel was 17, who'd held his hand in a hospital room and told him that love was the only thing worth building a life around, that everything else, money and power and legacy, all of it was just noise that got in the way of what mattered. Daniel had cried when he told Maya that story. They'd been lying in bed 3 months into their marriage, talking about the kind of parents they wanted to be. He'd cried and Maya had held him and known, absolutely known, that she'd chosen right. That this man with his kind eyes and his savior complex and his belief that the world could be better if people tried harder, this man was worth building a life around. And Daniel Jr., because how could she name him anything else? How could she carry her husband's son and not give him his father's name? It felt like the only thing she had left, the only inheritance that mattered. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. But desperation made people do strange things, made them reach for possibilities, even when logic said it was probably just a telemarketer or a debt collector, or someone else with bad news dressed up as an opportunity. She answered. "Hello, Miss Reeves." The voice was female, crisp, efficient. "My name is Claire Donovan. I'm calling on behalf of Alexander Harding." Maya's hand tightened on the phone. Her first instinct was to hang up. Her second was to scream. Her third, the one she actually followed, was to stay silent and wait for whatever fresh humiliation was coming next. Claire continued, unaware or unconcerned with Maya's silence. "Mr. Harding would like to meet with you, at your earliest convenience. There are some matters he'd like to discuss." Matters? The word was so carefully neutral it was almost funny. What kind of matters? Whether I'm going to sue him for wrongful termination? Whether I'm going to tell the press that he humiliates pregnant women for sport? What exactly does he think we have to discuss? Claire's voice didn't change, didn't react to the anger that Maya could hear in her own words. "I'm not at liberty to say, Miss Reeves, but Mr. Harding asked me to assure you that this meeting is important. He wanted me to tell you that it concerns your late husband." The world tilted. Maya sat down hard on the couch, her coffee slashing over the rim of the cup, burning her hand. She barely felt it. Daniel.
He knows about Daniel. Yes, ma'am. Claire's voice softened slightly, the professional mask slipping just enough to reveal something human underneath. He knows, and he'd like to speak with you, if you're willing. Maya's mind raced. How did he know? Who told him? Was it Bernard? Did the restaurant manager do some background check and find the marriage certificate? Or was it something else, something she'd missed? And more importantly, why did Alexander Harding care? He'd made it clear last night that she was beneath his notice, that her existence was an inconvenience, that people like her didn't matter to people like him. Unless he'd seen the ring, unless he'd recognized it, unless he knew exactly who she was and what she'd lost, and he was calling now because what? Because he felt guilty? Because he wanted to make sure she stayed quiet? Because his mother had sent him to finish the job she'd started 8 months ago when she'd handed Maya an envelope of cash and told her to disappear. I don't want his money. Maya's voice came out harder than she intended. If that's what this is about, you can tell him. It's not about money, Miss Reeves, Claire interrupted gently, at least not primarily. Mr. Harding was very clear that this is personal. He wants to talk, that's all. No lawyers, no contracts, just a conversation. Maya closed her eyes. The twins kicked again, harder this time, like they were weighing in on the decision. She thought about Daniel, about what he'd want her to do. He'd always believed in second chances, in the possibility that people could change, that cruelty was often just fear wearing a mask. He'd believed in his brother, too, even when Alexander had skipped family dinners and forgotten birthdays and treated the family business like a playground instead of a legacy. Daniel had always said Alexander just needed time, needed to find something worth caring about, needed to fall hard enough to remember what it felt like to be human. Maybe this was that fall.
Or maybe it was just another way for the Hardings to control the narrative, to make sure Daniel's widow and children didn't become an embarrassing footnote in their carefully curated story. Where? Maya's voice was quiet now, resigned. Where does he want to meet? There's a cafe, Bluebird, on 7th Street. Do you know it? I know it. It was 3 blocks from her apartment. Neutral territory, public, safe, or as safe as anything could be when you were meeting the man who destroyed you less than 12 hours ago. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Does that work for you? Maya looked around her apartment, at the pile of bills on the counter, at the ultrasound on the fridge, at the window that overlooked a parking lot and a dumpster and a slice of sky so narrow it barely counted. She had nothing to lose. That was the gift of being at the bottom. There was nowhere left to fall. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. I'll be there. Thank you, Miss Reeves. Mr. Harding appreciates. Tell Mr. Harding I'm not doing this for him. Maya's voice was steady now, clear. I'm doing this for my children, because they deserve to know who their father was, even if his family spent 8 months pretending he never existed. She hung up before Claire could respond, set the phone down, finished her coffee in 3 long swallows that burned all the way down. Then she stood, walked to the bathroom, and looked at herself in the mirror, really looked, at the dark circles under her eyes, at the face that had aged years and months, at the woman who'd been a medical student, a wife, a person with a future, and was now just a problem that needed managing. She turned on the shower, let the water run until it was hot enough to hurt. Then she stepped under it and let it wash away the coffee and the tears and the fear that lived just beneath her skin like a second heartbeat. Tomorrow, she'd meet Alexander Harding. Tomorrow, she'd find out what kind of man hid behind the cruelty. Tomorrow, she'd decide whether to forgive or to fight or to walk away and never look back. But tonight she just needed to survive until morning, and that, she'd learned, was its own kind of victory. Alexander Harding didn't sleep. He tried, lay in bed staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, listening to the city breathe below him, thinking about the photograph on his desk and the woman who wore his brother's ring, and the enormous, unforgivable possibility that he'd spent 8 months mourning a brother whose wife he'd never met, whose children he'd never known about,
whose life had been systematically erased by the one person who should have protected it. His mother, Victoria Harding, 72 years old, 5'4", elegant and terrifying in equal measure. A woman who'd built walls around her family so high that love had to scale them like a prison break. A woman who'd looked at her younger son's rebellion, his traveling and his startups and his refusal to conform, and decided he was a problem that needed correcting. A woman who'd done the same to Daniel's wife, decided she was a problem, and made her disappear. At 4 in the morning, Alexander gave up on sleep. He got up, made coffee strong enough to taste like punishment, and sat at his kitchen island with his laptop open and Claire's email staring back at him. She'd worked fast. By 7 a.m., she'd compiled a dossier on Maya Reeves that read like a tragedy in bullet points. Maya Christine Reeves, born in Sacramento, scholarship to UC Berkeley for undergraduate, full ride to Stanford Medical School, top of her class, on track to specialize in pediatric oncology, engaged to Daniel Harding in March, married in June, widowed in February, withdrew from medical school 3 weeks after the funeral. Current employment, waitress at Aurelis. Former employment, waitress at 4 other restaurants over the past 6 months. Current residence, studio apartment in a building with 16 health code violations. Current bank balance, Claire had somehow accessed this and Alexander felt sick reading it, $347. Prenatal records attached, twins, due in December. High-risk pregnancy due to stress and inadequate nutrition. Missed 2 appointments in the past month. Reason given, unable to afford copay. Alexander closed the laptop, pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw stars. This was Daniel's wife, the woman his brother had loved enough to marry despite their mother's disapproval, the woman carrying Daniel's children. And she was living in poverty, working jobs that fired her for being pregnant, missing medical appointments because she couldn't afford $25 copays. And Alexander had humiliated her in front of a room full of people who'd laughed because he'd given them permission. He'd looked at her and seen a problem instead of a person. He'd dismissed her like she was garbage cluttering up his line of sight. He thought about his brother. About the way Daniel had always seen people, really seen them, looked past the surfaces to the struggling human underneath. Daniel would have stopped, would have asked if she was okay, would have made sure she got home safe, would have been ashamed of the man Alexander had become. The coffee tasted like ashes. Alexander poured it down the sink and made another cup anyway. Then he sat at his desk and pulled out the photograph again. Daniel and Maya, happy, in love, building a life that had been stolen from them by a drunk driver and a rain-slicked road and the kind of random cruelty that made the universe feel personal. Alexander picked up his phone, dialed his mother's number. It rang twice before she answered, her voice crisp despite the early hour. Victoria Harding didn't believe in sleep as much as she believed in scheduled rest periods that recharged her for the next battle. Alexander, it's 5 in the morning. Did you know Daniel was married? Silence, long enough to be an answer. Then, we've discussed this. That girl was... Her name is Maya. Alexander's voice was cold, controlled. The tone he used in boardrooms when he needed to make someone understand that he was done negotiating. And she wasn't just some girl. She was Daniel's wife. She's pregnant with his children. And you paid her to disappear. More silence. Alexander could hear his mother breathing on the other end of the line, could picture her sitting in her study with its leather-bound books and oil paintings of dead ancestors, could see her face arranging itself into the expression she wore when someone had the audacity to question her decisions. I did what was necessary. Victoria's voice was measured, careful. The girl was unstable, grief-stricken. She would have become a liability. I offered her a settlement. She took it. End of discussion. She's living in a studio apartment with health code violations. She's working minimum wage jobs and getting fired because she's pregnant with your grandchildren. She missed medical appointments because she can't afford the copay. Does that sound like a generous settlement to you? I gave her $50,000, Alexander. What she did with it is not my concern. Alexander's hand tightened on the phone. Medical school debt, student loans, hospital bills from when Daniel died. You knew she'd have to use it for that. You knew she'd have nothing left. I knew she needed to move on. Victoria's voice hardened. And so do you. Daniel is gone. Dredging up the past won't bring him back. That woman is not part of this family. She never was. She's carrying Daniel's children. Then we'll make arrangements. Financial support, an education fund, something appropriate and discreet. But she stays out of our lives, Alexander. She doesn't get to use those children as leverage to... She's not using them for anything. Alexander stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. She's trying to survive, and you, made that as hard as possible. Because God forbid someone love Daniel for who he was instead of what he could provide. God forbid someone see past the money and the name and just love him. His voice broke on the last word. He took a breath, steadied himself, tried to find the composure that had carried him through 8 months of being the CEO he was never supposed to be, the son who was never enough, the brother who'd failed to save the only person who'd ever made him want to be better. I'm meeting with her tomorrow. Alexander's voice was quiet now, final. I'm going to apologize. I'm going to offer help, real help, not a payoff, not a settlement, help. And you're going to stay out of it. Alexander, you're making a mistake. Think about the company. Think about... I am thinking. For the first time in 8 months, I'm actually thinking instead of just surviving. And what I'm thinking is that Daniel would be ashamed of both of us, but especially me. He hung up, set the phone down, stood there in his kitchen with its marble countertops and its view of the city and its crushing, suffocating emptiness, and felt something he hadn't felt since the funeral: clarity, purpose, the sense that there was still time to become someone his brother might have been proud of. Not much time, but enough. Maybe. The sun was rising over Los Angeles, painting the smog-choked sky in shades of pink and orange that were beautiful despite everything, that insisted on beauty even when the world felt determined to crush it. Alexander watched it through his window and thought about the woman he'd meet tomorrow, the woman who loved his brother, the woman carrying his niece and nephew, the woman he'd humiliated because he'd forgotten how to see people as anything other than obstacles or assets. He'd make it right. He had to.
Because if he didn't, if he let Maya disappear again, let those children grow up never knowing their father or their family or the legacy they were owed, then he'd become exactly what his mother had always wanted him to be. And that was a fate worse than any he could imagine. Bluebird Cafe sat on the corner of 7th and Main, a small place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls, and coffee that actually tasted like coffee instead of burnt regret. Maya arrived 10 minutes early, her anxiety making punctuality impossible. She ordered a decaf latte, something the barista made with foam shaped like a heart, which felt like either a good omen or a cosmic joke depending on how you looked at it. She chose a table by the window, partly because it gave her a view of the street, a way to see Alexander coming and prepare herself, partly because it was near the door, an escape route if this meeting went the way she feared it might. She wrapped her hands around the warm cup and tried to steady her breathing, tried to remember that she was doing this for the twins, for the possibility that they might grow up knowing their father's family, that they might have more than just her and her mistakes and her minimum wage attempts at survival. The ring caught the morning light. She twisted it without thinking, a prayer to Daniel, a wish that he could be here to tell her what to do, how to navigate this meeting with the brother who'd never liked him much, but who'd given the eulogy anyway, who'd stood at the funeral and said beautiful things about legacy and service and the importance of family, while Maya sat in the back row, invisible and forgotten, mourning alone. Alexander arrived exactly at 9. She saw him through the window, saw him pause on the sidewalk, saw him take a breath like he was preparing for something difficult. He wore jeans and a plain white shirt, no tie, no suit, like he was trying not to look like the CEO who destroyed her yesterday,
Like casual clothes could erase what he'd done. Like dressing down was the same as being human. He came inside, spotted her immediately. Their eyes met, and she saw something she hadn't expected. Fear. Real, genuine fear. Not of her, of himself, of what he'd done, of what came next. He walked to her table slowly, stopped a few feet away. "Miss Reeves." "Maya." Her voice was steady. "If we're going to do this, you should probably use my name." He nodded, gestured to the chair across from her. "May I?" She nodded. He sat. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The cafe buzzed with morning activity around them. Students on laptops, a mother with a toddler, an old man reading a newspaper. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that at this table, two people were trying to figure out how to exist in the same story without destroying each other. Finally, Alexander spoke. "I need to apologize. For last night, for everything. What I said, how I treated you. It was unforgivable." Maya looked at him, really looked at him. He had Daniel's eyes, same color, same shape. But where Daniel's had been warm, open, Alexander's were guarded, cautious, like he'd learned early that showing emotion was a weakness people would exploit. "You're right." Her voice was quiet. "It was unforgivable. But I'm here anyway, because your assistant said this was about Daniel. So talk." Alexander pulled something from his jacket pocket, set it on the table between them. A photograph. Daniel and Maya on their wedding day. She gasped before she could stop herself, her hand reaching out to touch it, to trace the outline of her husband's face, to remember what it felt like to be that happy. "I found this in his desk, 2 months after he died." Alexander's voice was rough. "I didn't know he was married. My mother never told me. I never got to meet you, never knew you existed. And I'm so sorry for that, for all of it." Maya's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them back angrily. "Your mother knew. She came to me at the funeral, gave me money, told me to stay away from the family, told me Daniel's death was tragic, but there was no reason to pretend our connection meant anything." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I know. I called her last night. She admitted it. And what did she say? That she was protecting the family, that you were unstable, that paying you to leave was the kindest option." Maya laughed, a bitter sound that hurt her throat. "Kindest option? I had $60,000 in medical school debt, $20,000 in hospital bills from when they tried to save Daniel, another $15,000 in credit cards I'd maxed out paying rent when I couldn't work because I was too depressed to stand. Your mother's $50,000 disappeared in 3 months, and then I was alone, pregnant, broke, and too proud to come back and beg. I should have found you." Alexander's voice cracked. "I should have looked for you, should have asked questions."
Should have done literally anything except assume my mother was telling me the truth. Why didn't you? Because I was drowning. Alexander looked down at his hands. Daniel was the golden son, the one my father trained to run the company, the one everyone loved. I was just spare parts, insurance in case something happened to the real heir. When he died, I inherited a company I wasn't ready for, a board that hated me, and a mother who looked at me like I was wearing his skin. I spent 8 months trying not to fail, trying not to disappoint everyone, trying not to think about the fact that the wrong brother died. His voice broke on the last word. Maya saw it then, saw past the expensive clothes and the arrogance and the cruelty, saw the grieving brother who'd lost his only ally, who'd been thrown into a life he never wanted, who'd become hard because soft things got crushed in the world he'd inherited. She took a breath. The twins kicked. She put her hand on her stomach, a reflexive gesture. Both brothers did it when she told them they existed. Both of them reached out to feel the life growing inside her, to connect with something real and immediate and miraculous. Alexander's eyes followed the movement. His face changed, went pale. When? December. Maya's voice was softer now. twins, a boy and a girl. Daniel knew. She shook her head. He died before I found out. I was 12 weeks along when it happened. I found out at the hospital, after. Alexander closed his eyes, took a shaking breath. He would have been so happy. I know. They sat in silence. The barista called out someone's order. The toddler at the next table laughed. Life continued around them, indifferent to their grief, to their attempts to build a bridge across 8 months of misunderstanding and cruelty. "I saw your ring," Alexander said finally. "Last night, when you were leaving, I recognized it. Daniel had the matching band. We buried it with him." Maya twisted the ring again. It was his grandmother's. She gave it to him before she died. He said she was the only one in your family who understood what mattered. She was. Alexander smiled, sad and genuine. She used to tell us that love was the only thing you couldn't buy. That everything else, money, power, success, all of it was just noise. Daniel believed her. I forgot. You can remember. Maya's voice was quiet. It's not too late, isn't it? Alexander looked at her, his eyes red-rimmed. I humiliated you in front of a room full of people, got you fired, treated you like you were nothing. How do I come back from that? Maya was quiet for a long time. She thought about Daniel, about what he'd say if he were here, about the man she'd married, who believed in second chances and transformation, and the idea that people were always more than their worst moments. You start by being honest, she said finally, about who you are, about what you've done, about what you want to do differently. And then you show up, every day. You show up and you try to be better than you were yesterday. That's all anyone can do. Alexander nodded slowly. I want to help. Financial support, medical care, whatever you need. Not as a payoff, as family. Because those children are Daniel's, and he was my brother. And I failed him when he was alive. I won't fail his children. Maya looked at him, saw the sincerity, saw the fear, saw the man trying to climb out of the pit he dug for himself. I don't want your money. It's not my money. Alexander's voice was firm. It's Daniel's. He had a trust, life insurance, stock options. It should have gone to you automatically. But my mother, she made sure it didn't. She buried the paperwork, made it disappear. I found it yesterday when I was looking for proof. Proof that you were real. He pulled out another paper, pushed it across the table. It was a financial statement. Maya's eyes widened as she read the numbers. $2 million. Daniel's share of the family business, his investments, his savings. This is yours, Alexander said quietly. It was always yours, and I'm going to make sure you get every cent, along with an apology, a real one, public if you want it, whatever it takes to make this right. Maya's hand shook. She set the paper down. $2 million. Enough to finish medical school, enough to raise the twins without fear. Enough to give them everything Daniel would have wanted them to have. But more than the money, more than the financial security, was the recognition, the acknowledgement that she'd mattered to Daniel, that she still mattered, that she wasn't invisible anymore. I don't want a public apology. Her voice was thick with tears she'd finally stopped fighting. I just want my children to know their father's family. I want them to hear stories about him, to see photos, to understand where they come from. Can you give me that? Alexander's eyes filled. He nodded, not trusting his voice. Then he reached across the table and did something he'd never done with anyone outside his immediate family. He took Maya's hand, held it gently, let her see him cry. I promise, his voice broke. I promise they'll know him. They'll know how good he was, how much better he made everything, how much he would have loved them. I'll make sure they know. Maya squeezed his hand, and for the first time in 8 months, she felt something other than grief and fear and crushing loneliness. She felt hope, fragile and terrifying and real. She felt like maybe, just maybe, her children would grow up knowing they came from love,
that they were wanted, that they were part of a story bigger than loss. They sat like that for a long time. Two people connected by grief and blood and the ghost of a man who'd been better than both of them. Two people learning that family wasn't just what you inherited. It was what you built, what you fought for, what you chose every day to show up for even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when you'd failed before and would probably fail again. Outside, the city moved. People rushed to work. Cars honked. Life continued in all its beautiful, terrible, ordinary chaos. But inside the cafe, at a table by the window, something shifted. Something broken started to heal. And two strangers who should have been family began the long, difficult work of becoming what they were always supposed to be. 3 weeks passed like water through open fingers. Maya moved out of the studio apartment with its broken elevator and chemical smells and view of nothing. Alexander helped her find a place in Pasadena, a 2-bedroom with actual sunlight and a kitchen big enough to turn around in, and windows that overlooked a park where children played on swings and parents pushed strollers, and life looked like something worth living. The money came through. Not all at once, but in stages, carefully managed by lawyers who explained trust funds and investment portfolios and tax implications in language Maya barely understood, but nodded along to anyway. Daniel's money, his legacy, the life he'd wanted to build with her, arriving years too late, but arriving nonetheless. She paid off her debts first: medical school loans, hospital bills, credit cards with interest rates that should have been illegal. She watched the balances drop to zero and felt something loosen in her chest, some knot of anxiety that had lived there so long she'd forgotten what breathing without it felt like. Then she enrolled back at Stanford, part-time, online classes she could do from home while pregnant, with a plan to return full-time after the twins were born, after she'd figured out childcare and schedules and how to be both a mother and a doctor. Her professors welcomed her back with the kind of careful kindness reserved for people who'd survived something terrible. They didn't ask where she'd been. They just sent her the syllabi and told her they were glad she was back. Alexander called twice a week, not to check on the money or to make sure she was following some invisible script his mother had written, just to talk. About Daniel mostly. Stories Maya had never heard. Childhood memories of two brothers building forts in the backyard and sneaking out to watch meteor showers and fighting over who got to sit in the front seat. Stories that made Daniel real again in ways Maya had forgotten. Not just her husband, not just the man she'd lost, but a person with a history, with a brother who loved him, even when he didn't know how to show it. Victoria Harding never called. Maya didn't expect her to. Some walls were too high to climb, some wounds too deep to heal with anything except time and distance, and the hope that maybe the next generation would do better. But Alexander was trying, really trying. He showed up to one of Maya's doctor appointments, sitting in the waiting room with outdated magazines and nervous expectant fathers, looking completely out of place in his expensive suit. When the nurse called Maya's name, he'd stood too, and Maya had paused, surprised. "Do you want to come in?" she'd asked, not sure what answer she wanted. "Only if you're okay with it." His voice was careful, respectful. I'd like to meet them, even if it's just through an ultrasound." So he'd come in, sat in the chair beside the examination table while the technician spread cold gel on Maya's belly and moved the wand across her skin. And when the screen flickered to life, when two small figures appeared in grainy black and white, when the sound of their heartbeats filled the room like drums, like promises, like the future insisting it was real, Alexander had cried. The technician had smiled, used to emotional fathers, not realizing this man wasn't the father at all, just the uncle, just the brother trying to connect with the only pieces of Daniel that remained. "They're beautiful." Alexander's voice was thick. "They, like him."
Maya finished quietly. "I know." After the appointment, they'd gone to lunch. Nothing fancy, just a diner with vinyl booths and coffee that came in heavy ceramic mugs and pancakes that tasted like comfort food should. They talked about names, about nursery colors, about the impossible logistics of raising twins alone, even with money, because money couldn't hold a crying baby at 3 a.m. or change a diaper or kiss a scraped knee. "You won't be alone," Alexander had said, and there was something in his voice that sounded like a vow. "I'll help, however you need. I'm not Daniel, I can't replace him, but I can show up, I can try." Maya had believed him, not because she was naive or desperate or willing to forget how he treated her that first night, but because she'd seen something in him change over those 3 weeks, seen him soften, seen him ask questions instead of giving orders, seen him listen when she talked about Daniel, really listen, like he was trying to memorize details he'd missed when his brother was alive. And slowly, carefully, they'd started to become something neither of them had expected. Not friends, not yet. That would take time and trust and more healing than 3 weeks could provide. But family. The kind you chose. The kind you built from broken pieces and good intentions and the shared love of someone who was gone but not forgotten. The contraction started on a Thursday. Maya was in her new apartment studying for a pharmacology exam when the first one hit. Sharp, sudden, low in her belly like a fist clenching. She dropped her pen and pressed her hand to her stomach, breathing through it, telling herself it was Braxton Hicks, practice contractions, nothing to worry about. But then came another, and another, 5 minutes apart, then 4, then 3. And she knew, with the cold certainty of someone who'd spent months reading every pregnancy book she could find, that this wasn't practice, this was real. And it was too early. 34 weeks. The twins weren't supposed to come for another 6 weeks. They weren't ready. She wasn't ready. She called 911 first, gave her address in a voice that shook despite her best efforts to stay calm. Then she called Alexander. Her fingers were shaking so badly she almost couldn't dial. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. She was about to hang up, about to try someone else, anyone else, when he answered. "Maya, what's wrong?" "The contractions," her voice broke. "They won't stop. The ambulance is coming, but I'm scared, Alexander. It's too early. They're too small. What if—" "I'm on my way." His voice was immediate, certain. "Right now, I'm leaving. Stay on the phone with me. Just stay on the phone." She heard him moving, heard car doors and engines and the sound of traffic that meant he was driving too fast, breaking laws, not caring about anything except getting to her. She had another contraction, gasped through it, heard Alexander's sharp intake of breath on the other end. "You're doing great." His voice was steady now, controlled, the voice of someone who'd learned to lead through crisis. "Just breathe. In through your nose, out through your mouth. The ambulance will be there soon, and I'll be right behind them. You're not doing this alone. Do you hear me? You're not alone." The paramedics arrived first. 2 men and a woman, calm and professional, asking questions about her due date and her pain level and whether her water had broken. They loaded her onto a stretcher, into an ambulance that smelled like antiseptic and fear, and somewhere in the chaos of sirens and IV lines and questions she didn't have answers for, she lost her grip on the phone. She arrived at St. Catherine's Hospital at 4 in the afternoon. The labor and delivery ward was a maze of white walls and fluorescent lights and nurses who moved with the kind of efficiency that should have been comforting, but wasn't. They got her into a gown, into a bed, hooked her up to monitors that showed the twins' heartbeats, fast and strong, fighting to stay where they were, even though her body had decided it was time to let go. A doctor came in, Dr. Patricia Chen, 50-something with kind eyes and steady hands. She examined Maya quickly, thoroughly, then looked up with an expression that was carefully neutral. "You're at 4 centimeters. The babies are coming. We're going to try to slow things down, give them a little more time, but if that doesn't work, we'll need to deliver. 34 weeks isn't ideal, but we've got an excellent NICU team. Your babies will be in good hands." Maya nodded, not trusting her voice.
not trusting anything except the monitors that showed 2 heartbeats, 2 lives, 2 reasons to keep breathing, even when her own breath felt impossible. "Do you have anyone we can call?" Dr. Chen asked gently. "Family? A partner?" My brother-in-law." Maya's voice was small. "He's on his way."
Chen nodded, squeezed Maya's hand once, then left to prepare for whatever came next. And Maya lay there in a hospital bed that smelled like bleach and other people's emergencies, with contractions that were getting stronger and closer together, and she talked to the twins. "I know you're scared." Her voice was barely a whisper, her hands pressed to her belly. "I know it's not time yet, but if you have to come now, if you can't wait, then I need you to be strong. Like your father, like the man you'll never meet but who loved you before he even knew you existed. Be strong like him, and I'll be strong like me, and we'll figure this out together." The door burst open. Alexander stood there, his hair disheveled, his shirt half untucked, his face pale with fear. He looked like he'd run the entire way, like he'd fought through traffic and ignored red lights and abandoned his car in a no-parking zone because none of that mattered as much as being here. "Maya." He crossed the room in 3 strides, took her hand. "I'm here. I'm not leaving." She squeezed his hand so hard it must have hurt, but he didn't pull away. He just stood there, solid and present and real, and Maya felt some of the terror ease just enough to let her breathe. The door burst open. Alexander stood there, his hair disheveled, his shirt half untucked, his face pale with fear. He looked like he'd run the entire way, like he'd fought through traffic and ignored red lights and abandoned his car in a no-parking zone because none of that mattered as much as being here. "Maya." He crossed the room in 3 strides, took her hand. "I'm here. I'm not leaving." She squeezed his hand so hard it must have hurt, but he didn't pull away. He just stood there, solid and present and real, and Maya felt some of the terror ease just enough to let her breathe. They tried to stop the labor, gave her medication that made her feel like her heart was racing, like her body was vibrating from the inside out. But the contractions kept coming, stronger, faster, pulling her under like waves she couldn't escape. And after 2 hours, Dr. Chen came back with a team of nurses and an expression that said the time for waiting was over. "We need to deliver, now. Baby A is in distress, heart rate's dropping. We're going to do everything we can, but I need you to push when I tell you to. Can you do that?" Maya nodded, looked at Alexander. He was still holding her hand, his eyes red-rimmed, his jaw set. She saw Daniel in his face then, saw the brother who'd stayed with his wingman through a sandstorm, who'd saved lives without needing credit, who'd believed that showing up was the most important thing a person could do. "Don't leave," she whispered. "Never," he promised. "I'm right here." The delivery was fast and terrifying. Maya pushed through pain that felt like being split open, like her body was tearing itself apart to make room for 2 lives that weren't supposed to come yet. She pushed and screamed and gripped Alexander's hand hard enough to leave bruises, and through it all he stayed. Talked to her, encouraged her, told her she was doing great, she was almost there, just a little more. Baby A came first, Sophia. So small, Maya's breath caught. The doctor held her up for just a second, just long enough for Maya to see the tiny face, the closed eyes, the impossibly small body that didn't move, didn't cry, didn't make any sound at all. The NICU team swarmed, took Sophia away before Maya could touch her, before she could count fingers or toes or memorize the face of her daughter. They disappeared through a side door with equipment Maya didn't recognize, an urgency that made her chest tighten with a fear so absolute it felt like dying. "One more," Dr. Chen's voice was firm. "Baby B is coming. Push, Maya. Push." She pushed, didn't think she had anything left, but found reserve she didn't know existed, found strength in the terror, in the need to meet her son, to hear him cry, to know that at least one of them was okay. Baby B came out screaming, Daniel Jr., loud and indignant and furious at being forced into a world that was too cold and too bright and too big.
The sound filled the room like music, like hope, like proof that life could be loud and messy and absolutely perfectly real. Dr. Chen held him up, let Maya see him for 3 seconds before the NICU team took him too. But those 3 seconds were enough. Enough to see Daniel's nose, enough to see dark hair and waving fists, and a face that was red with rage and somehow, impossibly, beautiful. Then he was gone too, both of them gone. The room suddenly quiet, except for the beeping of monitors and Maya's ragged breathing and Alexander's quiet crying beside her. "They're in the NICU," Dr. Chen said, already moving to deliver the placentas, to check for complications, to make sure Maya hadn't torn anything that wouldn't heal. "They're fighters, both of them. We'll know more soon." Maya lay back on the pillow, exhausted beyond anything she'd ever felt. Her body ached, her hands shook, her eyes wouldn't stop leaking tears that ran down her temples into her hair. She'd just given birth to 2 babies she hadn't gotten to hold, hadn't gotten to touch, hadn't gotten to tell them she loved them or that everything would be okay, even though she had no idea if it would be. Alexander was still holding her hand. His grip had loosened, but he hadn't let go. Maya turned her head to look at him, saw him staring at the door where the twins had disappeared, saw the tears on his face.
Saw something break open in his expression, something raw and real and absolutely devastated. "They're Daniel's children," his voice cracked, "and I couldn't protect them, couldn't keep them safe, couldn't." "You're here." Maya's voice was hoarse from screaming, from pushing, from the kind of pain that rewrote your understanding of what a body could survive. "That's protecting them, being here, showing up. That's what matters." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw him understand, finally, what Daniel had known all along. That love wasn't about control or perfection or the ability to stop bad things from happening. Love was about presence, about witness, about standing beside someone in their worst moment and saying, "I'm here, I see you, you're not alone." The waiting was worse than the delivery. Maya was moved to a recovery room, given pain medication that made everything fuzzy but didn't touch the fear. Alexander stayed, sat in the uncomfortable chair beside her bed and refused to leave, even when the nurses said visiting hours were over, even when security came by and looked at him with suspicion, even when everything in his body language said he wanted to pace, to demand updates, to do something, anything, except sit and wait. Hours passed. A nurse came in periodically to check Maya's vitals, to ask about pain, to say the NICU team was still working and they'd have an update soon. Each time, Maya's heart would spike with hope and terror. Each time, the nurse would leave without real information. Each time, the fear would settle back in her chest like a weight she couldn't shift. At 11 p.m., Dr. Chen finally came in. She looked tired but not devastated. That felt important. That felt like maybe, possibly, there was good news hiding in the exhaustion. "They're stable," she said, and Maya felt Alexander's hand tighten on hers. "Both babies are in the NICU on ventilators. Sophia had some trouble breathing on her own, which is common for preemies. Daniel's doing a bit better. He's on a lower oxygen setting. But they're both fighters, both stable, both alive." Maya closed her eyes, let the relief crash over her like a wave. They're alive. That was all that mattered. Everything else, the tubes and the ventilators and the machines keeping them breathing, all of that could be dealt with. But they were alive. "When can I see them?" Her voice was small, childlike, the voice of someone who'd been stripped down to the most basic needs and found that everything else, pride and dignity and composure, none of it mattered compared to the need to see her children. "Now, if you'd like," Dr. Chen smiled, "we can wheel you down. They're too fragile to hold yet, but you can touch them through the incubator openings. Talk to them. They'll know your voice." The NICU was on the 4th floor,
A maze of incubators and monitors and machines that beeped and hummed and kept tiny humans alive through sheer technological will. The lights were dim, respectful of the babies who weren't supposed to be in the world yet, who needed darkness and quiet and the illusion of the womb they'd left too soon. A nurse led Maya and Alexander to 2 incubators side by side. And there they were, Sophia and Daniel. So small they looked like dolls, like something fragile that would break if you breathed too hard. Tubes and wires connected them to machines. Their chests rose and fell with mechanical assistance. Their eyes were closed, their faces peaceful, like they were dreaming of a place that was warmer and safer than this sterile room. Maya reached through the opening in Sophia's incubator, touched her daughter's hand with one finger. The skin was soft, impossibly soft, warm and real and alive. Sophia's fingers curled slightly, an involuntary reflex, but Maya chose to believe it was recognition, chose to believe her daughter knew she was there. "Hey, baby girl," Maya's voice broke. "I'm your mom. I'm here. I'm so sorry you had to come early, but you're strong. You're gonna be okay. We're all gonna be okay." She moved to Daniel's incubator. He was slightly bigger than his sister, his face a little less fragile looking. She touched his hand the same way, felt the same soft skin, the same warmth, the same impossible miracle of life. "And you, Daniel Jr., named after the best man I ever knew. You're loud and angry and perfect, just like he was, just like you're supposed to be." Alexander stood between the 2 incubators. His hands gripped the metal frames like he needed something solid to hold on to. He looked at Sophia, then at Daniel, then at Maya, and his face crumpled. "I don't know how to do this," his voice was raw. "I don't know how to be what they need, what you need. I'm not Daniel. I'm not good at this, at family, at love, at any of it." Maya looked at her then, saw the fear, saw the grief, saw the man trying so hard to be someone he wasn't sure he knew how to be. "You don't have to be Daniel."
These babies already had a father. They don't need you to replace them. They just need you to be their uncle, to show up, to love them. That's all. That's enough. Is it? Alexander's eyes were wet. Because I've spent 8 months being the wrong person, the cold person, the cruel person, the person Daniel would have been ashamed of. How do I come back from that? Maya was quiet for a moment. She looked at her children, at the tiny lives fighting to breathe, fighting to live, fighting because that's what life did. It fought, even when everything seemed impossible. You already are coming back. You're here. You stayed. You showed up when I needed you. That's not the wrong person. That's exactly the right person. They stood there in the dim light of the NICU, 3 generations of a family that was broken and rebuilding, that was learning what it meant to love without conditions, to show up without guarantees, to be present in suffering because presence was the only thing that mattered. And for the first time since Daniel's death, Alexander felt something other than grief and guilt. He felt purpose. He felt needed. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he could become the person his brother had always believed he could be. The twins stayed in the NICU for 6 weeks. Maya practically lived there, sleeping in the chair beside their incubators, learning to change diapers on babies who weighed less than 5 pounds, learning to bottle feed them when they were finally strong enough to eat on their own, learning the rhythms of machines and the meaning of numbers on monitors, and the small victories that came in ounces gained and oxygen settings lowered. Alexander came every day, sometimes twice. He'd arrive in the morning before work, still in his suit, and sit with the twins for an hour. Then he'd come back in the evening, loosened tie and exhaustion in his eyes, and sit for another hour. He learned their faces, learned which cries meant hunger and which meant discomfort, and which meant they just wanted to be held. The nurses taught him how to do kangaroo care,
skin-to-skin contact that helped regulate the baby's temperature and heart rate and gave them the human connection they desperately needed. The first time Alexander held Sophia against his bare chest, felt her tiny body pressed against him, felt her heartbeat sync with his, he'd cried so hard a nurse had to check on him to make sure he was okay. "I'm fine," he'd said, his voice thick. I never knew it could feel like this." The nurse had smiled, understanding. "That's love, Mr. Harding. That's what it feels like." Victoria Harding came once, 3 weeks into the twins' NICU stay. She appeared in the doorway like a ghost from a past everyone was trying to forget. 72 years old and still formidable, still terrifying, still carrying herself like someone who'd never apologized for anything and didn't plan to start now. Maya saw her first, felt her entire body tense, felt Alexander's hand on her shoulder, steadying, supporting, saying without words that she didn't have to face this alone. "Mrs. Harding," Maya's voice was cold, controlled. "What are you doing here?" Victoria stepped into the NICU, looked at the incubators, at the tiny babies fighting for every breath. Something shifted in her expression, something that might have been regret, or might have been just the acknowledgement of time passing and chances lost. "I came to see my grandchildren." Her voice was quieter than Maya remembered, less certain. "They're not your grandchildren." Maya's voice was hard. "You made that clear 8 months ago, when you paid me to disappear. When you erased me from Daniel's life like I was a mistake that needed correcting." Victoria flinched, actually flinched. Maya had never seen her show vulnerability before, had never imagined she was capable of it. "I was wrong." The words came out stiff, unpracticed, like she was speaking a language she'd never learned. "About you, about Daniel's choices, about everything." Alexander stepped forward. His voice was firm. "Mom, if you're here to cause problems, to make Maya feel worse, I'm here to apologize." Victoria cut him off. She looked at Maya, really looked at her. "I did wrong by you, by Daniel, by these children. I was afraid of losing control, afraid of someone loving my son for reasons I couldn't understand or manipulate. So I pushed you away, made you disappear. And I'm sorry." The words hung in the air. Maya didn't know what to do with them, didn't know if forgiveness was possible, or wise, or something she even wanted to offer. She looked at Alexander, saw him nod slightly, saw him give her permission to choose, to decide, to set the terms of what came next. "I can't forgive you yet." Maya's voice was quiet but steady. "What you did, it nearly destroyed me. I lost Daniel, lost my career." "Lost 8 months with your son, Alexander, because you decided I wasn't worthy of knowing my husband's family. That's not something I can just forget because you showed up and said sorry." Victoria nodded, accepting. "I understand, but may I see them? Please. I won't touch them, won't interfere. I'd like to see them. Once." Maya hesitated, then nodded. "Just once." Victoria approached the incubator slowly, looked at Sophia, then at Daniel. Her face, usually so controlled, crumpled. She pressed her hand to her mouth, closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, there were tears. "They look like him." Her voice broke. "Like Daniel when he was born. So small, so perfect, so much like him." "They do," Maya agreed quietly. "Every day they look more like their father." Victoria stood there for a long moment. Then she turned to Maya. If you ever decide you can forgive me, if you ever want these children to know their grandmother, I'll be waiting. No conditions, no demands. Just waiting for whenever you're ready." She left without another word, walked out of the NICU and out of their lives, leaving behind only the possibility of something different, something better, something that might, someday, look like family. Alexander watched her go, then turned to Maya. You don't have to let her back in, ever, if you don't want to. I know. Maya looked at her children, at the tiny lives that were getting stronger every day. But maybe, someday, not for her, for them. So they know where they came from. So they understand their history, even the complicated parts. 6 weeks after their birth, the twins came home. Sophia first, then Daniel 3 days later. Maya's apartment, the one Alexander had helped her find, suddenly felt full in the best possible way. Full of crying and diapers and the constant exhaustion of feeding 2 infants every 3 hours. Full of life. Alexander was there almost as much as Maya. He'd taken leave from the company, something that shocked his board and probably disappointed his mother. But he didn't care. For the first time in his life, work wasn't the most important thing. Family was. He learned to swaddle, learned to soothe, learned that sometimes babies cried for no reason, and the only thing you could do was hold them and whisper that everything would be okay, even when you weren't sure it would be. He was surprisingly good at it, patient in ways Maya hadn't expected, gentle in ways that made her see the brother Daniel had loved, the person Alexander had been before life taught him to be hard. One night, 3 months after the twins came home, Maya found Alexander in the nursery at 2 a.m. He was holding Sophia, rocking her gently, singing something off-key and quiet. Maya stood in the doorway, watching, not wanting to interrupt. Your dad was better at this. Alexander's voice was soft, meant for Sophia but loud enough for Maya to hear. He was better at everything. But I'm trying. I'm going to keep trying. Because you deserve someone who shows up, who loves you, who remembers him through loving you. Sophia made a small sound. Not quite a coo, not quite a cry. Just a noise that meant she was listening. That meant she knew she wasn't alone. Maya stepped into the room. Alexander looked up, startled, almost embarrassed. Sorry, I heard her crying and I thought, thank you. Maya's voice was thick with emotion. For being here. For staying. For being the person Daniel knew you could be. Alexander looked down at Sophia, at the small face that was slowly growing, slowly looking less fragile and more like a real baby who would grow into a real person. I wish he could see them. He can. Maya sat in the other rocking chair, the one where she spent countless hours nursing and soothing and just existing in the strange, timeless space of early parenthood. I believe that. I have to believe that. Otherwise, it's too hard. They sat in silence for a while. 2 people who'd come together through tragedy and were building something that looked like hope. 2 people learning that family wasn't just blood. It was choice. It was showing up. It was 2 a.m. feedings and whispered songs, and the shared burden of loving 2 small humans who'd never meet their father, but would grow up knowing they were loved by the people he'd left behind. 1 year later, the ballroom at the Harding Industries headquarters was full. Executives, employees, board members, all gathered for what was supposed to be a standard quarterly meeting, but had turned into something else entirely, something bigger. Alexander stood at the podium. But before he could speak, before he could launch into the presentation everyone expected, he pulled out his phone, tapped the screen. And suddenly, projected on the wall behind him, was a photo of 2 babies, 1 year old, sitting at park, covered in birthday cake, laughing. These are Sophia and Daniel Harding. Alexander's voice was steady, clear. My niece and nephew.
My brother Daniel's children. He died before they were born. And I spent 8 months not knowing they existed. 8 months being the kind of person who would have looked at their mother and seen a problem instead of family. The room was silent. People shifted uncomfortably. A few executives exchanged glances. But Alexander didn't stop. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand something about Harding Industries, about what we're going to become. We're not just a company that makes products and generates profit. We're a family. And family means showing up for people who need us. It means using our resources to lift others up instead of pushing them down. It means remembering that behind every number on a spreadsheet, there's a human being with a story we don't know. He clicked to the next slide. It showed a logo, the Harding Family Foundation. Underneath, a mission statement: supporting single parents, funding medical care for children, providing scholarships for students who've lost family members. This foundation will be funded by 10% of Harding Industries' annual profits. It will be managed by people who understand loss and struggle and what it means to rebuild your life from nothing. And it will carry my brother's legacy forward. Not the legacy of a businessman, the legacy of a man who believed that the only thing that mattered was how you treated people when they needed you most. The room erupted in applause. Genuine, loud, the kind that made Alexander's chest tighten with emotion he didn't try to hide. He saw Maya in the back row, holding Sophia. Saw Claire beside her, holding Daniel. Saw them both smiling. Saw something that looked like family. After the meeting, people crowded around, asking questions about the foundation, offering to help, sharing their own stories of loss and struggle, and the people who'd shown up for them when everything fell apart. Alexander listened to all of it, learned names, made promises, became for the first time in his life the kind of leader who led with heart instead of fear. Maya waited until the crowd cleared. Then she approached with the twins. Sophia reached for Alexander immediately. He took her, settled her on his hip with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent a year learning how to be an uncle. "That was a good speech," Maya said. "Daniel would have been proud." "I hope so." Alexander looked down at Sophia. She was grabbing his tie, pulling it toward her mouth the way she did with everything. He gently redirected her hand. "I've been thinking about the foundation, about asking if you'd want to be involved, help run it, use your medical knowledge, your experience. You'd be perfect for it." Maya was quiet for a moment. She'd finished medical school, online classes and night studying, and the kind of exhaustion that came from being both a mother and a student. She'd graduated 3 months ago, was starting her residency in pediatric oncology in the fall. But this was Daniel's legacy. This was making sure other people didn't fall through the cracks the way she had. "I'd like that," she said finally. "I'd really like that." They walked out of the headquarters together, Alexander carrying Sophia, Maya carrying Daniel. 2 adults and 2 children who'd built a family from grief and mistakes and the slow, painful work of becoming better than they'd been. They walked into the parking lot where the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that were beautiful despite the smog, despite the city, despite everything that tried to make beauty impossible. In the car, strapping the twins into their seats, Maya's hand went to her ring, the interlocking wings, the reminder of a love that had been cut short but never diminished. She twisted it once. A prayer, a thank you, a promise that she'd keep going, keep building, keep making sure Daniel's children knew they came from something beautiful. Alexander saw the gesture, recognized it now. That was his grandmother's ring. It was. Maya smiled, sad but real. Daniel said she was the only one in your family who understood what mattered. She was. Alexander closed the car door gently, careful not to wake Daniel, who'd already fallen asleep. "But I'm learning. Thanks to you, thanks to them. I'm learning." They drove to the park, the one near Maya's apartment where they went every Saturday, where they pushed the twins on baby swings and fed ducks and sat on benches watching the world move around them, where they talked about Daniel, about memories and stories, and the man who'd been better than both of them but who'd loved them anyway. The twins played in the grass. Well, Sophia played. Daniel mostly sat and grabbed at blades of grass and tried to eat them before Maya could stop him. Alexander lay on his back, staring up at the sky, watching clouds drift past in shapes that didn't mean anything but were beautiful anyway. "Do you think he knows?" Alexander's voice was quiet.
"Daniel, do you think he knows we're trying? That we're doing our best?" Maya lay down beside him, looked up at the same sky. "I think he knows. I think he's proud of us, proud of who we're becoming. Even me? Even after everything I did wrong? Especially you." Maya turned her head to look at him, "because you could have stayed who you were, could have stayed cold and cruel and protected, but you didn't. You chose to change. That's harder than being good from the start. That's everything. Alexander's eyes filled with tears. He didn't try to hide them. Just let them fall. Let them run down his temples into his hair. Let Maya see him broken and healing and human. Thank you for giving me another chance, for letting me be part of their lives, for saving me the way Daniel would have if he'd been here. You saved yourself, Maya said quietly. I just gave you a reason to try. They lay there for a long time. Two people who'd hated each other, then forgiven each other, then learned to love each other in the way family does when it's chosen instead of inherited. Two people watching clouds and children and the afternoon light turn golden. Sophia crawled over to Alexander, pulled herself up using his shirt, stood on wobbly legs, balancing with one hand on his chest, looking down at him with Daniel's eyes and Maya's smile and a personality that was entirely, beautifully her own. "Hey, little one," Alexander's voice was soft. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer, just stood there, swaying slightly, looking at her uncle with the kind of trust that came from a year of him showing up, of him being present, of him proving that he was safe and solid and not going anywhere. And Alexander felt it then. The thing he'd been chasing for 34 years without knowing what it was. Purpose, belonging, love that didn't need to be earned or performed or proven. Love that just was. Because he'd shown up. Because he'd tried. Because he'd chosen to become someone worthy of this small person's trust. Daniel Jr. crawled over too, sat on Maya's chest, his diaper-padded bulk making him look like a little sumo wrestler. He grabbed her necklace, the one with Daniel's wedding ring on it, the one she'd added after the twins were born, because wearing it on her hand made nursing difficult. Both babies, both parents, both lying in grass in a park in Los Angeles, while the sun set and the world kept turning, and life continued being impossible and beautiful and absolutely perfectly worth fighting for. "This is enough," Alexander said quietly. "This moment, this family, this is enough." Maya reached over, took his hand, squeezed it once. "It is. It really is." They stayed until dark, until the twins got fussy and hungry and needed to go home. They packed up the diaper bag and the toys and all the equipment that came with having one-year-old twins. They strapped the babies into car seats. They drove home through streets they knew by heart now. And when Maya put the twins to bed that night, when she sang them the lullaby Daniel used to hum, when she kissed their foreheads and turned out the light and stood in the doorway watching them sleep, she felt him there. Not gone. Not really. Just flying beside her now. In a different way. She walked to the living room. Alexander had stayed for dinner, had helped with bath time, was now sitting on the couch looking exhausted in the best possible way. "You should go home," Maya said. "Get some sleep. We'll see you tomorrow." "Tomorrow," he agreed, but he didn't move, just sat there, comfortable in a space that had become as much his as hers, in a life they'd built together from pieces that shouldn't have fit, but somehow did. Outside, the city breathed. Millions of people living millions of lives, some falling, some rising, some learning that the distance between the two was shorter than they'd ever imagined. That sometimes the people who hurt you could become the people who heal you. That sometimes family wasn't about blood or history or obligation. Sometimes it was just about showing up, staying, choosing to love even when it was hard, even when it hurt, even when you'd failed before and would probably fail again. Because that's what love was. Not perfection, not control, not the absence of falling. Just the presence of someone willing to catch you when you did. And if you were very, very lucky, someone you could catch in return. Maya looked at the ultrasound photo, still taped to her fridge after all this time. Two small figures curled together. The beginning of everything that came after. She smiled, twisted her ring one more time, and whispered into the quiet apartment that smelled like baby lotion and hope. Thank you for the twins, for Alexander, for second chances and chosen family, and the reminder that even when you lose your wings, you don't lose your sky. You just learn to share it with the people who teach you how to fly again.
And somewhere, somehow, she felt Daniel smile back. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Sometimes our worst moments become our greatest transformations, but only if we're brave enough to let others in. Subscribe for more stories that remind us that love, in all its forms, is always worth fighting for. Because at the end of the day, we all deserve someone who shows up, someone who stays, someone who chooses us, even when we're at our worst. That's family. That's love. That's everything.